objectivity of your photographs was challenged, we saw how staunch you remained to that which, within yourself, you knew to be true." More drinking of the nectar-like beverage followed. Then Ramu announced that it was time to return to Earth. Adamski was led back to the saucer. He was flown back to Earth and driven to his hotel. Few words were exchanged during the drive. Adamski was absorbed in his thoughts, and Furkan, at the wheel of the sedan, left him alone. In his hotel room he sat on the edge of the bed, reflecting on his meeting with the space people. And he realized that it's unbelievable as it was, he must speak of it to mankind. For the space people had made him their messenger. Adamski slept for a few hours, then took the bus back to Mount Palomar. He was soon at work on his book, Inside the Spaceships. It would relate the events of that memorable night, describe the space people and their philosophy, and tell of subsequent journeys into space. During one of these trips, he was flown around the Moon more than a decade, before the astronaut missions of Apollo 8. During another, he was shown an awesome scene on a television screen, the surge and swirl of interstellar dust, and energy, the basic force of the universe. And in the book's most inspiring passage, Adamski describes his return to Earth, after one of those rides aboard the saucer. Truly, the philosopher had benefited profoundly from his encounters with the space people. And he would continue to benefit from them, as author, lecturer, and celebrity. His books were selling, and drawing national attention to Adamski, the man who had traveled in flying saucers, who had photographed them. Not only was he in demand as a speaker, in 1958, he and C. Honey, his chief assistant, completed a 4,000-mile lecture tour, but as a guest on radio and television shows. He and his followers had sold Palomar Gardens, and purchased a property further up the mountain. Among the buildings that they raised on the new site were accommodations for a growing number of visitors. These included persons who came to study cosmic law, some of them widows with large bank accounts, and also a long-haired, bearded contingent, West Coast beatniks who dug Adamski. Other marginal types were also showing up. Lamented Lucy McGuinness, "You would be surprised to learn how many mediums come with special messages for Adamski. People of all branches of religion and metaphysics drive up to enlighten and save him. Some are very difficult to talk to, but we do our best to be patient and friendly at all times." And visiting from time to time was Adamski's brother, a Catholic priest. He and George would engage in long discussions. No doubt they touched upon organized religion, of which Adamski seems to have strongly disapproved. For some time now Adamski had been coordinating a network of correspondents. These devoted followers, known as co-workers, received from Mount Palomar newsletter, the Cosmic Bulletin, that kept them posted on the activities of the space people. They corresponded with one another and organized study groups. The network extended beyond the borders of the U.S. and was to prove useful in 1959, when George Adamski embarked upon a world tour. The tour had been prompted, he insisted, by the space people, who had told him to go forth and explain the reasons for their coming. It began in New Zealand, in January, then moved on to Australia, England, Holland, and Switzerland. Co-workers in each country had arranged meetings, lectures, and publicity. From its start the tour was a success. The lectures, which included a film, were attended by overflow crowds. Australia was particularly gratifying. When his plane landed in Sydney, a crowd of reporters, curiosity seekers, and saucer enthusiasts, whom Adamski describes in his book, Flying Saucers Farewell, as wonderful men and women who are dedicated to seeking out the peaceful productive means by which we shall earn our rightful, dignified position among the civilizations of other planets converged on him, and he held a press conference. The ensuing publicity helped fill the lecture halls. Then it was on to England, where he lectured to large crowds and appeared in a television debate with an astronomer. Adamski claims to have won the debate through sheer dignity. But the high point of the tour came in Holland. Just before his arrival, Adamski learned, to his surprise and glee, that the country's ruler Queen, Juliana, wished to meet with him. Juliana had a penchant for the mystical. Her attachment several years earlier to a faith healer had prompted calls for her abdication, but she had weathered the crisis. Having heard that the man who had gone up in a flying saucer was about to visit her domain, the Queen wanted to talk with the fellow. Adamski checked into a hotel in The Hague. The next day a royal limousine picked him up and drove him to the palace. As he was led inside, Adamski, pleased with himself, was saluted by guards, doormen, and attendants. The audience took place in the library. Wearing a stately blue frock, the Queen was flanked by Prince Bernhard, her science advisors, and the Air Force Chief of Staff. Unable to dissuade the Queen from meeting with an obvious charlatan, as they viewed Adamski, these men had sought to form a protective group about her. Adamski was nervous with anticipation, he recalls in his book, Flying Saucers Farewell, in the presence of the Queen. I completely forgot all the instructions and could not remember the formalities that should have followed. Instead, I acted upon my feelings, for here was a feeling of welcome as among friends. Coffee and pastries were served. Then, for nearly 2 hours, Adamski regaled Her Majesty with an account of his adventures in space. The Queen listened politely and attentively. Her advisors, however, kept asking Adamski questions designed to discredit him. The space traveler remained undaunted. At one point he insisted officials in the U.S. were withholding information on UFOs, and asked the Queen if the same situation might not exist in Holland. Her Majesty gave a tiny smile of acknowledgement. When the audience was over, both the Queen and the Prince shook Adamski's hand. The firmness of their handshakes impressed him. Of the princes he would remark, it was one of those handshakes which mean more than words. I felt he was in agreement with me. And climbing back into the royal limousine, Adamski was returned to his hotel. Meanwhile, words of Juliana's meeting with a flying saucer contactee had spread, and Holland was thrown into an uproar. Declared one newspaper, "A shame for our country." Another paper was more accommodating, "We are not opposed to a court jester on the green lawns of the royal palace, provided he is not taken for an astronomical philosopher." In an interview with the Air Force chief, dismissed Adamski, "The man's a pathological case." But Juliana seemed to have enjoyed her meeting with the man who had been to space. Said one of her advisors, the Queen showed an extraordinary interest in the whole subject. And Adamski, who went on to lecture before sold-out houses in The Hague and Amsterdam, stated that Her Majesty had been very interested. "I wish everyone had an open mind to progress, and I don't mean gullible, as I experience today." The The next stop on the tour was Switzerland. He was picked up at the train station and taken to a hotel.